Okay, hi everyone. So there's this topic, right, which has come up recently, and it actually forms part of a question that a client actually reached out to us about. And the question is, are the properties in Bangkok leasehold or freehold? And the main concern here, right, was because recently there are some Singaporeans who purchased properties in Malaysia, and then they realized that they weren't purchasing a leasehold title, but instead they were purchasing a lease. But anyway, I will touch on that shortly. And also a lot of people who, before they enter the Bangkok property scene, right, they're not sure about the title that buyers in Bangkok are buying, whether it's leasehold or freehold. Okay, so I explained leasehold or freehold, right? So you have to understand the idea of ownership. Okay, so ownership is when you own a property, right, you can decide to either sell or rent. And the leasehold is such whereby the ownership reverts to the state or the owner when the lease term expires. So if let's say I'm the state, in this case maybe I'm the Thai government, then I lease the property to you in the form of ownership. So I lease the ownership, or I give you the ownership of the property for 30 years. So in Thailand, the leasehold title is 30 years, if renewable on 2 occasions. So the total lease that you can own is 90 years. So for 90 years, you will own the property, and then at the end of 90 years, or if you decide not to renew, then at the end of 30 years, then the ownership reverts to the Thai government, or the owner for that matter. If my example were the owner, then it will be the owner, but not my example is the Thai government. So for freehold ownership, right, there's no expiry, which means that you own the property all the way. That means there's never, if you don't change ownership, you don't sell, then you own the property forever. Then you can pass it on to your next of kin, offspring, and then they can pass it on to the following generation as well. So in Thailand, right, especially in Bangkok, because we're familiar with Bangkok properties, as we deal with Bangkok properties only, in Bangkok, actually, like perhaps 99.99% of the properties which we sell in Bangkok are freehold, which means that there is no expiry on the ownership, and the title deed states that it's freehold. You obtain a freehold title to it. So then there's this concept of leasehold and lease. So what is a private lease? Okay, in Malaysia, there is this thing called a private lease. You are essentially a tenant, and you're not an owner. Okay, so basically ownership, as my previous slide has explained, right, you can decide to sell or rent the property. But if it's a private lease, like for example, maybe I'm the landowner, then you lease the land from me. It's a private lease, then sort of I'm leasing the land to you, then maybe for 10 years. You are a tenant, you're not the owner, so you cannot decide to sell the property. It's essentially like you rent a property from me. Okay, so it's not a leasehold. Leasehold is when there's ownership for a certain period of time. But for lease, right, it's different. Private lease, you are a tenant, you're not owner. You cannot sell the property because I'm the property owner. Okay, for a leasehold, right, if you own a 30-year leasehold, you stay for 5 years, you decide that there's a buyer who wants to buy the remaining 25 years and the right to renew, then you can sell. You don't need to ask anybody because you are the owner for that period of time. So in a private lease, right, you are a tenant, you don't own the property, and this is a major consideration if let's say you are looking at overseas properties, and properties in Malaysia is part of your consideration. And properties in Malaysia, right, there's this concept of a lease. So I believe that I've been searching in Thailand, there is no such thing as a long-term private lease of 30 years or 90 years or something like that. Okay, so essentially when you buy the lease, right, you're buying a leasehold property, you're not buying the lease. Okay, so like I mentioned, right, almost all properties sold by my company, and actually most properties which we see in Thailand are all freehold, which means that you have full ownership of the property, and this ownership, there's no expiry. Okay, so you need to know where or what you're investing in. So if you comparing between different titles, between different cities, and let's say you're considering Bangkok against I don't know, maybe Kuala Lumpur or Johor Bahru, then it would do you some good to actually study and understand what you are buying, because you might not actually be buying ownership, but you're actually buying a lease. Okay, so even though you're buying a leasehold property, right, it's still ownership for a certain period of time. That means you can decide to sell or rent. You don't need to ask anybody if you want to sell or rent. That's the that's the that's the that's the feature of a leasehold. There's ownership rights to it. Okay, but a lease does not have. So you must be very conversant with these terms when you're investing overseas. Okay, so if there are any other questions, right, you can email myself or my colleague. My email is dara@investbangkokproperty.com, or you can email Kevin. These are our websites, ibprealestate.com or investbangkokproperty.com. Okay, so that's all from me, and I will see you at the next video.